The iron cage swings in the winter wind, creaking against its chains. Inside, a woman's body hangs motionless, her flesh blackened by exposure, her face frozen in an eternal scream. The marketplace below continues its daily rhythm, merchants hawking their wares, children chasing through the mud, as if the grotesque display suspended above them were nothing more than a common signpost. This is not a relic of ancient barbarism. This is 16th century Scotland, and the woman in the gibbet cage died for the crime of speaking too boldly to her husband. The morning frost clings to the iron bars, glittering like jewels in the pale dawn light. A young girl clutches her mother's skirts, staring upward at the terrible spectacle. Her mother pulls her away, whispers harsh warnings about the fate of disobedient women, about the price of stepping beyond one's ordained place. The church bells toll the hour, their resonant bronze voices echoing across the cobblestones, drowning out the protests that no one dares to voice. In palaces and peasant hovels alike, women navigate a labyrinth of laws designed not to protect them, but to control them. Their bodies are not their own. Their voices are dangerous weapons that must be silenced. Their very existence is a crime waiting to be punished. What follows is not merely history. It is a catalogue of systematic cruelty, refined over centuries, sanctioned by church and crown, executed with bureaucratic precision. The court of Henry VIII glimmers with an opulence that borders on the obscene. Candlelight dances across cloth of gold tapestries, reflecting in the polished silver platters that groan beneath roasted swans and subtleties shaped like castles. The air hangs thick with the scent of rosewater and ambition. Ladies of the court move through the great hall like swans themselves, their elaborate gowns whispering secrets against the rush-strewn floors, their jeweled hoods catching the firelight. They smile, they curtsy. They know that their beauty, their wit, their very presence at court could elevate them to unimaginable heights, or condemn them to unthinkable deaths. Anne Boleyn understood this dance better than most. Her dark eyes, described by contemporaries as both mesmerizing and unsettling, scan the room with calculated precision. She is not the most beautiful woman at court. That distinction belongs perhaps to her own sister, the high table with the dignity of her Spanish breeding. Her face reveals nothing, but her fingers worry at the golden pomander hanging from her girdle, releasing waves of clove and cinnamon into the air. She knows. Every woman at court knows. The king's desire is not merely lust, it is political necessity, wrapped in carnal obsession. In the antechambers beyond the great hall, the machinery of power grinds forward. Thomas Cromwell, the blacksmith's son, risen to become the king's chief minister, scratches away at parchment with a quill that sounds like rat's feet on floorboards. He is drafting legislation that will shake the foundations of Christendom itself, the Act of Supremacy, which will make Henry head of the Church in England, severing ties with Rome and Pope Clement VII. The Pope who refuses to grant the annulment. The Pope who will not, cannot, allow Henry to cast aside Catherine for Anne. But there are older laws already in place. Laws that have governed women's bodies and behaviors since time immemorial. In the villages beyond the palace walls, women accused of adultery face public shaming. Stripped to their shifts, their heads shorn, paraded through streets while neighbors hurl offal and accusations. In Scotland, the branks await. Iron masks, fitted with a spiked plate that presses down upon the tongue, silencing women deemed too quarrelsome, too outspoken, too resistant to male authority. These punishments are not anomalies. They are the infrastructure of patriarchal control, as essential to the social order as tax collection or military conscription. Anne rises from her seat, and the court rises with her. The king extends his hand, and she takes it, her slender fingers disappearing into his massive palm. They process toward the presence chamber, and in their wake, whispers multiply like plague rats. Some whisper of witchcraft. How else could a mere knight's daughter ensnare the king so completely? Others speak of prophecy, of a new Jerusalem that will rise when the old church falls. None speak of the obvious, that Anne's real crime is not sorcery, but ambition. The audacity to believe she could reshape her own destiny in a world where women's fates were written by men. The torches gutter in their sconces, casting writhing shadows across the whitewashed walls. Somewhere in the kitchens below, "Master Kingston," she addresses the constable of the tower, her voice steady, despite the trembling of her hands. "Do I go into a dungeon?" "No, madam," he replies, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond her left shoulder. "You shall go into the lodging you lay in at your coronation." The cruel irony is not lost on her. The same chambers where she dressed in purple velvet and ermine, where she placed her hand upon her swelling belly and dreamed of the son she would deliver, now serve as her prison. The rooms smell of damp stone and old regret. A fire burns in the grate, but it produces no warmth. Anne's ladies attend her, women chosen not for their loyalty, but for their willingness to report every word, every gesture, every midnight sob to Cromwell's agents. The charges against her are monstrous. Adultery with 5 men, including her own brother George, treason, incest, plotting the king's death through witchcraft. The accusations tumble forth like entrails from a slaughtered pig, bloody and steaming and impossible to ignore. In truth, the evidence is gossamer thin, woven from court gossip and the tortured confessions of men who know that their own survival depends upon confirming the Crown's narrative. Mark Smeaton, the court musician, broke under interrogation. What methods were used? History does not record with certainty, but the rack in the tower's basement tells its own story through the screams that echo through the night. Anne's true crime is written not in adultery, but in biology. She has given Henry a daughter, the fierce, red-haired Elizabeth, but not the son he craves. She has suffered miscarriages, the last occurring mere weeks ago. In a world where a woman's value is measured by her womb's productivity, Anne has failed the only test that matters. Worse still, she has made enemies. She mocked Cromwell's low birth. She opposed his foreign policy. She dared to disagree with the king on matters of theology. These are not offenses punishable by law, but in Henry's court, the law bends like soft wax to accommodate royal will. In the Great Hall at Westminster, a special court convenes. 26 peers sit in judgment, their faces grave beneath their velvet caps. They know what verdict is expected. Among them sits Anne's own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, who will condemn his niece to death without a flicker of remorse. Family loyalty is a luxury when one's own neck is at stake. Against predetermined judgment, the jury retires briefly, long enough to maintain the fiction of deliberation, and returns with the inevitable verdict: guilty. The sentence is spoken in flat, bureaucratic tones. She is to be burned at the stake or beheaded, at the king's pleasure. Anne receives the judgment with her head held high, but her hands grip the arms of her chair with such force that her knuckles bleach white. That night, alone in her chamber, she laughs, a sound hovering between hysteria and defiance. "The king has been very good to me," she tells her attendants, her voice brittle as January ice. "He promoted me from a simple maid to be a marchioness. Then he raised me to be a queen. Now he will raise me to be a martyr." Beyond the tower walls, across England and across Europe, other women face their own reckonings. In Germany, women accused of witchcraft are subjected to trial by water, bound and thrown into rivers, their guilt proven if they float, their innocence established only through drowning. In Spain, the Inquisition employs the garrucha. The accused is suspended by her wrists, bound behind her back, then dropped suddenly, dislocating shoulders with a sound like breaking branches. In France, women who commit infanticide, often the desperate act of rape victims or the destitute, are buried alive, their screams muffled by the earth that fills their mouths. The mechanisms of female punishment are refined, documented, passed down through legal treatises and ecclesiastical decrees. They are not aberrations, they are institutions. The morning of May 19th, 1536, dawns clear and bright, a mockery of mercies, as if God himself turns his face away from what is about to transpire. Anne Boleyn rises before dawn, dresses with meticulous care, in a dark grey damask gown with a crimson kirtle beneath, the colour of martyrs. Her ladies bind her long dark hair up beneath a coif, exposing the slender column of her neck. She requests the sacrament, receives it kneeling on the cold stone floor of her chamber, her lips moving in prayers that no one records. At 8 o'clock, she walks across the green toward the scaffold that has been erected specially for her execution. Not the common scaffold on Tower Hill, where her alleged lovers died in agony 2 days prior, their bodies hacked with steady steps. Her face pale as milk, but composed, she addresses the crowd, her voice carrying across the assembly with the same authority she once commanded in the presence chamber. "Good Christian people," she begins, "I am come hither to die, according to law, and therefore I will speak nothing against it." She does not protest her innocence. To do so would implicate the king in judicial murder and might endanger her daughter Elizabeth. Instead, she praises Henry as a gentle and sovereign lord, the words coating her tongue like poison honey. She removes her hood, and her ladies bind her eyes with a white linen cloth. She kneels upright, without a block, repeating a single prayer. "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesu, receive my soul." The swordsman approaches silently, his blade concealed in the straw beside the scaffold. He calls out, "Bring me the sword," a distraction. Anne turns her head toward the sound, and in that instant, he retrieves his weapon and swings in one fluid motion. The blade passes through her neck so cleanly that witnesses will later swear her lips continued moving in prayer, even as her head separated from her body. Blood fountains across the black cloth, bright arterial crimson that steams in the morning air. A cannon sounds from the tower ramparts, signaling that the deed is complete. Her body and head are gathered hastily into an elm arrow chest. No proper coffin was prepared, and buried without ceremony in the chapel of St. Peter ad Vincula within the tower grounds. Before sunset that same day, Henry VIII is betrothed to Jane Seymour. Within 24 hours, he is dressed in white, the color of celebration. But Anne's death is merely a single thread in a vast tapestry of female suffering. Across the Channel in France, women convicted of murdering their husbands face execution by being burned alive. Not the comparatively swift death of strangulation before burning, granted to heretics, but full consciousness as flames consume flesh. The punishment is deliberate. A husband killer has committed not merely murder, but petty treason, the overturning of the natural order, where man rules woman, as king rules subject. In the German states, the punishment for women accused of bearing children out of wedlock becomes increasingly baroque. The Jungfernkäfig, the virgin's cage, confines young women in iron boxes, barely large enough. Enforcement falls disproportionately upon women accused of same-sex relations, women whose desires place them beyond the pale of acceptable femininity. In the American colonies, the Puritan settlements developed their own refinements. The scarlet letter, branded or sewn upon clothing, marking adulterers for lifetime shame. Rebecca Nurse, a 71-year-old woman of impeccable reputation, will hang in Salem in 1692 for witchcraft, her only crime being the jealousies she inspired in younger, more vindictive neighbors. The scaffold in the Tower Green is dismantled, its timbers repurposed for other constructions. The bloodstains on the black cloth are scrubbed away by servants who speak of it only in whispers. But the message has been delivered with perfect clarity. A woman's body is never truly her own. It belongs to father, to husband, to king, to state. It can be displayed, dissected, destroyed at the pleasure of those who wield power. Anne's daughter Elizabeth will grow to become the greatest monarch England has ever known, ruling for 45 years, never marrying, never granting any man dominion over her sovereignty. She will keep a ring containing a miniature portrait of her mother, hidden from public view but never forgotten. "I am my mother's daughter," she will say in private, and those who hear it understand that she speaks not merely of blood, but of bitter lessons learned. The tower's ravens circle overhead, their harsh cries echoing off the stone walls. Legend holds that if the ravens ever leave the tower, the kingdom will fall. But no legend speaks of the women who fell first, whose bodies fertilized the ground upon which empire was built. The question that haunts us across the centuries is not whether these punishments occurred. The historical record is unambiguous, written in blood and legal precedent, preserved in the very architecture of our oldest institutions. The tower still stands. The devices of torture rest in museums, their iron jaws open, in silent testimony. The question is darker, more troubling. Why did entire civilizations construct such elaborate mechanisms for female suffering? Why did societies invest such creativity, such bureaucratic precision, such theological justification into the systematic control and punishment of women's bodies? Was it merely about power, the eternal human hunger to dominate, to subjugate, to transform fear into authority? Or was it something more fundamental, morally justified? By the Victorian era, women would be confined to asylums for hysteria, a diagnosis applied to any behavior from sexual desire to political ambition. Their bodies would be subjected to medical experimentation without consent, their personhood dissolved into the category of legal chattel under coverture laws. The methods changed. The underlying logic remained constant. We like to believe we have progressed beyond such barbarism, that the branks and the ducking stools and the burning stakes belong safely to history. But the impulse that created them, the conviction that women's bodies are public property, that female autonomy represents a threat requiring containment, that impulse has proven remarkably durable. It manifests in different forms, wears different masks, speaks in the language of each successive age. The question is not whether we have escaped the shadow of that scaffold on Tower Green. The question is whether we ever truly left it at all.